Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Conversations with Rip. Today we got author, special guest, Linwood Jackson Jr. promoting his latest book, Becoming, Wrestling with Life. How you doing, brother?
Man, I'm doing all right. And I'm more than happy to be here.
Listen, man, I'm happy to have you on the platform. This is actually the first episode, season 4 of Conversations with Rip, where, we scratch, beyond the surface, if you will. Everyone's chasing entertainment, and that's fine. But there are others who have so much value to offer, right? Different perspectives, different upbringings. Today, we have an author who's putting out a poetry book, but, he has more to offer than just poetry, right? You're in the field of healing, If you can kind of just explain who you are, what made you want to get into this space a little bit, just kind of give them a rundown of, who you are exactly.
Linwood Jackson Jr. I like to go by poet, author, philosopher, and I call myself poet, author, philosopher because my frame of mind and the context that I'm coming from has to do a lot with, as you say, healing from within, and also healing from within for the purpose of love. In a lot of my work, although focused around philosophy from the context of within the Hebrew scriptures, or the context of from within the New Testament, or from the context of mental health, it has to do with love. So everything about me is about the true definition of love and self-love. When we think about self-love, we think about, I need to do something that is for me, that will make me feel good. I need to do something for me that's going to make me forget about this so that I can realize or recognize or remember who I am. So we're getting away from conflict, and we are replacing that conflict with some sort of desire, whether that is some cringe desire or some base, whatever desire that is. We're getting away from the core of the pain of us and fixing it on something else. And so we as a society like to confuse love with passion. And when we think about self-love, we think about passion. So, and that's the misstep that we take. And that's the misstep that what I like to believe my work is centered on, focusing on, just rearranging that. We confuse whether it is in our relationship with other people, whether it is in our relationship with ourselves, whether it is in our relationship with our life purpose, whatever relationship we have, we take love for passion, we confuse love for passion, and at the end of it all, it just always leads to some sort of misfall because a passion can run out. Passions run out. Love never runs out. Love always goes on. So my work focusing on bringing back real mental and spiritual well-being to those that will hear me. My goal is to make sure that love circulates from within you, and at the same time being able to rightly define what that love is.
Listen, you're in a world that's in need of a lot of love, right? It seems like we're addicted to the hate. We're addicted to the cycle that constantly just keeps us on this hamster wheel. And I think it's very interesting to have this conversation because, for so long we would, try to resort to certain vices as if it was a Band-Aid, just slap the Band-Aid on to get us from point A to point B. But as we sit here on July 31st in 2026, those tactics aren't working anymore. It seems like life is getting harder and harder, and people are working daily around the clock, overworked, underpaid, right? There's no aspirations for anything outside of what we're addicted to. It's just a constant repeat, the same old cycle. We're going to pull up your book, right? Your poetry book. I'm going to pull this up because I'm just curious. Now, of course, for those looking to purchase this book, I'll have the link in the description. Give me a second. But the first thing that comes to mind, Becoming, Wrestling with Life. I mean, where does the title come from? What was the inspiration behind this book? I'm just curious. What does that mean? Becoming, Wrestling with Life.
Honestly, man, it's everything that you just touched on. How we are addicted to the hate and how we are addicted to what is negative. And I think that that comes from us being conditioned. We are conditioned to accept that as being the standard. And so we inevitably draw towards that. And for me, I recognize that within myself and I question that and examine that through poetry. That's my outlet, poetry and writing. So the idea of becoming is you have to be able to, in this specific book, wrestle with life, which is an entity on its own. And then also another hidden character is love, which is an entity on its own. We live in this world that is conditioned just as we are, but in its own conditioning, this invisible intelligence that governs our invisible inward well being through energy. There is an energy that life governs us by, and there is an energy that love governs us by. And so, wrestling with life, it actually means wrestling with energy. And that wrestling with energy comes from within. So each one of these poems is dedicated to questioning and reasoning with life, from me giving life everything that I think it wants, to me not giving life anything that I think it wants, but then it hates me for it, to me then ignoring life, and then life wanting or trying or attempting to ignore me. Wrestling back and forth with the invisible intelligence that is governing each and every single one of our lives and trying to be one with that energy. That came from times where disappointment came into my own self. I remember the one point was graduating college, undergrad, and I graduated and I felt like an educated dummy because I had just went through an experience that when I graduated, it didn't resonate with me at all. Like I went out, you go out there, you're told, you're fed this story, and then you go out and the story doesn't become you. And while I was seeing the story wasn't becoming me, I was continuing to go still through the process as an ignorant lamb, believing that it's going to work out for me, not realizing that it's not what you know that does anything for you in this life. It's who you know. Your connections are everything for you. What you know means nothing to you. You can get trashed for everything you know, and you can know everything right. But the individual that knows everything wrong because they know that one person that's going to be able to promote them, they're the ones that's going to get over you because it's just how. And that disappointment hit me hard because I realized I had fed into a lie, and I realized I had not thought outside of the lie. I began to hate myself because I didn't question the lie. I didn't question myself. I didn't have a brain. I just went with it. And so that led me to more of an inward struggle with myself. And so that's where becoming comes from, being able to take your disappointment, to learn and to grow from it, and at each step recognize what you need to do in order to be, to quote unquote be, to be you, to be the unique presence and essence that you are. And that's where all of that comes from, the fight within that I had and still am going through to this day.
I'm gonna be real. It's like sometimes it's like, how do you know this? And we just meeting. You know what I mean? We just met, but you're saying things that resonates with my everyday life because it is a battle. Sometimes it is within, right?
Yeah.
And you find yourself in these moments in life, if you're blessed enough to truly sit back and reflect. But it makes you wonder, at that moment when you were faced with that challenge, what made you decide to search inward instead of outward? Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. And I didn't. So I didn't. What I did was that frustration led me into something absolutely physical, which was turning my energy to something I could control. And what I could control was the gym. So I loved gym. I loved exercising. And so I enjoyed the pain of it. The pain felt pleasing, but I ended up overdoing it with the supplements, ended up hurting myself. And then that is what led me to be like, why would I take myself through such an experience for mistaking pleasure with pain when I could have this whole time questioned myself? And now there I was, injured and having to recover and thinking about, do I need to just go in now? So you're right. Yeah, it didn't move me to we have to go through something like the physical. We have to get close to dying in order to be able to realize that living means absolutely nothing without thinking. So that's what
Yeah.
led me to think about more from the pain I caused myself and realizing that I could either continue this, I could wait 2 years in order for my organs to be able to heal themselves fully and then go back into bodybuilding or that hate, or I
Mm.
could actually sit down with myself and question myself and try to get to the point of why I did this without actually talking to myself. And that's what I did. And that's what led me on this route of realizing that even though we're all different, even though we all have different experiences, the one thing that makes us the same is that we collectively have an essence within us and we are collectively walking around in a machine. And if I'm going through this, someone else is going through it at the same rate or at a harder rate. So
Yeah.
if I can find this well-being and learn about it and then share it, well, then I can be able to help someone. So that's really where that came from.
I only asked that because, again, I remember graduating high school, going to college, and dropping out, withdrawing in the first semester. I found myself back home, right, with my friends. I needed something familiar, right? You talk about life and challenges. If you're a person that always wants the easy route, you want things to go the way you want, you'll never accomplish anything. But I noticed at that moment in my life at 19, 20, it was very pivotal because that moment, if I'd have made the wrong decision, it could have changed my life, altered, you know what I mean, my life forever. And I say that because this world is constantly feeding you a fantasy. You said it earlier about a matrix, right? And we grow up in a household, if we're blessed enough to have people that, raise us with the right integrity, right? Understanding the principle of life. Some people aren't, blessed enough to have that. But regardless of what, your parents are like your home, mainly is like your safe place, right? And as you get older and become a young adult, you start to feel like the outside world has something to offer. That's your own elders, your own family. And again, it's all part of the system. But I say that to say, whenever you're in doubt, you never go external. You never look out into the world for answers
Very
when the
true.
creator has
Very true.
instilled everything that you need to know right on the inside,
Very
right
true.
here. And I think that's what's very telling about this conversation because you speak about love, right? And how it's forever. Um, and I'm with you. I agree wholeheartedly. However, what about the days when it feel like hell, right? What happens when that war that you talk about within, it starts to tip over on the other side, in which I like to call what we call duality, right? Where it seems as if at times there's a need for both in order for the world to balance itself out. What are your thoughts about that when I say that?
There is a need for both. And I think
Mm.
that that need for both is dependent upon the person. So what I mean by that is when you've gone through a lot of experiences where you are fighting yourself and where you are taking the time to personally dig into your own philosophy, because that's another thing I'm about. It's about, I am also about what it means to develop self philosophy. And self philosophy is self standard, self regulation, self perception, and the ability to use your awareness of all of that to guide you through exactly what you're talking about. So we do need the down days or the days of hell, and then also the days of heaven. But at the same time, I think going through that experience of you wrestling with you, what I have taken away is a greater understanding of what it means to be human and what it means to exist here. And what it means to exist here, it means to exist in an encoded software. So everything that this is, that we are, that this experience, this living experience is, it is an encoded software. and it is an encoded software that does not run on positivity. The natural essence of this life is not positive. It's never going to be positive. It wasn't designed to be positive. The natural essence of this is negative. It's going to run negative. It's always going to run negative. Negative is what flows natural to everything. Positivity has to be created from nature itself, showing that it has to be created because nature in essence dies eventually, but then it revives. That death comes first. Everything runs negative in this realm, including us. And I think my fault is, and if anybody resonates with me, is that we believe that positivity isn't ending. We believe that positivity is first. So we are looking at an outlook where I am okay, therefore someone else should be okay. I need to treat them the way that I would be treated because they would treat me that way. As an example. But in reality, our perception is skewed based upon our lens. And so those days of hell are necessary to, like you said, rebalance. And that rebalance is to recheck our state, in our state, that this is going to be completely negative. That's what we're born into. That's what this realm is. That's the currency. So we have to be able to take that and now flip it. And that's where the challenge is, because we don't really realize that off the bat. So I think that it's necessary. That duality is necessary for sure. And I say that it depends on the person, because as you're going through these experiences, you really should be able to, first of all, there's nothing that we can do about it. So we have to just accept that this state runs negative. But what we can't accept is that we run negative. So we need those days, and we need that balance so that we can be able to check ourselves, and so that we can be able to have enough in us to check someone else, even without words, to let them know what we've been through and where we are, and that even though based on our responses to them, they too can get to that place, because that hell, as 100% as this is, it's completely necessary for us to build up the 0% of positivity that exists around us and then also within us.
Yeah, that's why I said, a lot of the things that we're talking about today that we discuss, I'm constantly having the conversation with the creator, in my own time, right? During, the highlights, during the lowlights, right?
Yeah.
But what I've learned is that it's the duality that, it's that scale and that perfect balance, because, if you're too good of a person, you start to invite, all
Something's
types
up.
of energy towards your way, right? Where you have to now essentially stand up for yourself, right? And then there's the negative, where we're in a world today where, we like to think that if one becomes too negative, eventually karma catches up. There's so many different ideologies and beliefs on how we go about life. But, regardless of what, I like to think that both is necessary in order for life to balance out the way that it's intended. You know what I mean? So, from this perspective, coming up in Baltimore City, where a lot of my peers, drug addiction, a lot of them product of their environment, right? A lot of these issues were created by a system who targeted our people. That system is still alive to this day.
Still alive.
Yes, and it's very challenging now, because growing up as a 90s baby, at least we took pride, in Black power, liberation, understanding that, there were elders and those who paved the way to get us here, right? And it was those lessons and the teachings that we got directly from them that's literally saving our life to this day. You know what I mean? Because the internet is not going to give you knowledge itself, right? The colonizer, the person who has its separate agenda, is not going to give you, the answers, right? Sometimes for me, it feels like this whole thing that we're going through, in the world, feels like man trying to prove that there is no God, that there is no creator, right? It's this constant battle with, male ego and having world domination over those, specifically our people who are very spiritual. We do believe in a higher power, right? And it doesn't, come out the pages of a book. I don't want to say something that comes off too judgmental, but the point is we have so many different upbringings, right? Someone like yourself, who very educated, scholar, very intellectual. You have someone like myself who grew up from the streets, but yet here we are. right, on the same path, coming up with the same, essentially, understanding that things need to happen, changes need to be made, right? Because there are a new generation of our youth who needs this guidance, right? They might not be sports savvy. They might not be really into entertainment. So this is where someone like yourself, Linwood Jackson Jr., comes into play, because you start speaking, to that third eye. You start speaking to a certain part that they didn't even know existed, because this world is constantly trying to, suppress the real and feed you, the fake.
I do, and I agree with you, and I think that despite whatever paths, like we align because of purpose. And I think that that same purpose of enlightenment, because we do, like it's 2026, and there's a lot of things that, and as you're speaking, literally the only thing that's in my mind, because this is my landscape, is the philosophical culture of religion. You talk about culture and what people are using to uh, bridge themselves together. You go back 90s or however further back, it was a culture of a community that was based off of a religious aspect that kept things in check. You go to today's world, and the aspect of religion that's keeping everyone in check is almost the same, or almost along the same lines of what is secular culture. And I say that because a lot of the things that are being taught by, I may be going way off here,
Go ahead, continue. Go ahead.
but a lot of the things that are taught in from a spiritual landscape or from a religious perspective, they are feeding off of the same desires that secular culture are keeping minds washed in. So this idea of, for example, religion, this idea of giving yourself outside of yourself to an entity above you. It's the same thing of secular culture doing the same thing, and I'm saying this from a secular point of view, not from a natural, real point of view. I'm saying this from the perspective of keeping a community based off of what they expect, going back to colonization, as you were saying, to replace or make as if there is no God with man, to what we now have today from a secular point of view. Because the idea of inflicting such dogma from the colonizers up until this point, and especially on the Black community, is to keep a mind engaged with only one field of thinking, of looking, of feeling, of behaving, and of moving. When that line gets broken, when that gets scattered, then we're able to, as you were saying, grow and see things from a different lens and from a different perspective, despite the background that we are all coming from. So I agree with you, and at the same time, when you're speaking, all I'm hearing or all I'm resonating with is the religious and spiritual culture that has played a part in tearing apart the community, Black community, or religious communities in general, and into a false hope of a 2026 sort of framework that is deteriorating the youth within them, and that is playing a part in having them go out and look for other routes, because it's supposed to be that this spirituality or whatever is supposed to get me here. But no, I've had individuals that come from outside of spirituality go into religion, and they're like, it's no better. So the things that are circulating, and this is just my world of religious philosophy, that are circulating within the theological institutions, within all these places that are being fed to these people. The conversations I'm having with people in churches, that church isn't doing it for them anymore. There isn't anything taught that's worthwhile. The things that are being taught are not matching up to what's going on actually in the books that they have their faces in. I think that it plays back to that duality from secular and religious culture. They're both mimicking each other, and that's leaving us, the individual, that is putting faith on a faith, or that is putting faith on a outside secular approach, to actually be more lost than anything else. So I agree with what you're saying.
A lot of people, and of course we're speculating, but like I said, do you think that one's relationship with God or their perceived relationship with God is valid if they're not religious or
Mm.
spiritual. Do you think that's
So,
valid?
so you use the key word perceived. So if their perceived relationship, is it valid? So the one philosophical point, and when I say this, like it's always interesting to hear the reactions. But the one philosophical point from within the Hebrew scriptures, from Genesis to the book of Malachi, when you look at the language and the way that the language is structured in its context, religion is the enemy. Being spiritual is the enemy. Drawing oneself to a deity is the enemy. That's not what's taught from within the Hebrew scriptures. So validating what I interpret you to be saying or asking is, in my own stream of thought, validating one's religious culture to then deem oneself religious or spiritual is through ritual. It's through ritual, it's through tradition, it's through baptism, it's through commandments that are handwritten by dogma, denomination, or persuasion, or whatever that may be. The way that we conclude who is valid or who is not valid is through such a service to what is something physically edible, something physically worn around the neck, something visibly that you can say is a do or not do, something physically that is a rite or a ceremony. That's to the Hebrew scriptures, the philosophical culture that is within there, false. That's false religion. The flip side of that, what is true religion, is being able to embody your living experience in a way that brings you closer to the invisible intelligence that this life is. So that's what the Hebrew scriptures teach. And so being able to, going back to your question, understand what's valid from a spiritual perspective, I think it falls back to how are you perceiving your own type of experience. If your own type of experience is driven by something that has been given from mother and father, and I have to continue that because that's religion. If your experience is something that's driven by some sort of traditional religious upbringing, and you have to stay strict to that because if I'm not serving God. God wants this. We have never seen a God do anything that we see in church. We have never seen a God actually portray himself. No one has. And the things that are written are not actually real. They're not written to be taken real. When you look at how they're written in the context, they're written to enlighten us to a way that a culture perceived, and that culture isn't necessarily 2026 culture. So when it comes to spirituality, when it comes to religion, we have to be able to look at how cultures previously interpreted it, and then if we want to then move forward with that, presently make sense of it in a 2026 landscape, to be able to know what to deem religious and what not to deem as valid or not. The code is, if you are submitting yourself to what you perceive to be a religious tradition, despite you following it or not, despite you calling yourself a traditional name or not, despite you following that, you are doing something that is not right. If you are, in essence, questioning that and taking that questioning and then understanding why that question matters and then getting an experience to draw you closer to the invisible essence that is mindful over your living experience in that spiritual experience, then that is the true experience. That is what's valid. And I think that will differ from different people.
That's true. I mean, you're making valid points. Like when I speak, it's for the person that's on the fence, right? The person that judged you based on the cover of your book, didn't even give a chance to have the conversation with you. Because again, there's so many of us right now that are just stuck on the fence of, where do I start, right? For children born into this world who didn't have that upbringing where things were forced upon them, regardless of what religion you practice, right? Because again, that changes throughout time, right? When it comes to African people, our people, their belief system, much spiritual, connected with the universe. Everyone had different ideologies and practices. We could talk about Lord Krishna, Buddha. What I believe, and again, it's just my beliefs, I feel like there's one human race, one planet,
Yeah.
should be one code of conduct, if you will, right? But for some reason, man, not to just, just generalize it, man came up with this elaborate scheme to divide, so many different gods, so many different deities, so many. And
Yeah.
the more and more you realize it, that we all have to coexist on this world, whether you like someone's lifestyle or not, we all have a right to be here. So for me, and why I chose the spiritual path, is because it seemed much simpler in how I go about my life, right? It's not as divisive. That doesn't mean,
Mm.
Individuals are void of accountability. But at the end of the day, like you said, we're in 2026, and the things that we used to resort to is not working anymore. And it's going to take a collaborative effort, a group of many minds, right? In order to fix this issue that we have that's continuing to seem like, it seems very ongoing, but I feel like right now, this is that moment that people are starting to feel like something is happening. There's a change that we're, a part of right now as we speak. And like I said, for those who automatically, you know, judge you before you even say anything, we see people all the time coming from the religious world. And, what are your thoughts on that when it's someone who, again, may not be open to the forms of, like you said, practicing your belief in a higher power? How do you find your way back home, so to speak, when you're lost?
I think I could I think I can tie this in to what you just said, because you said something that was really interesting, and I think touches on like what brings us together and
Mhm.
like-minded individuals. But at the same time, I don't ever want anyone to forget that the place we are in, called Earth, it's encoded. It's encoded and designed with a system that is going to have what prevails. So the collaborative aspect of waking certain minds, because not all minds are going to care, but waking certain minds to what the definition of love is, to what the definition of culture is, to what the definition of human is, to what the definition of being a collective group of oneness is, we are forever going to be striving against a system not even set up by humanity. I'm talking about, as we can't see air and as we can't see the atoms that form the air, there is an invisible encoded system in this domain that is not going to actually let uh, real prevail. Because, not for anything wrong or like that, but it's only because this planet is set up to develop. So this planet is set up to develop. Whoever is born here, whoever has, in essence, growing within a human organism, they are here to face the challenges that are encoded within it. And that means that we can do in our time what we are supposed to do, but for all other times, they're going to have to restart the process all over again, because this place is supposed to be a ground for development. We are supposed to feel what we're feeling right now. We are supposed to see ignorance, and we are supposed to get mad at it, while others, the majority, 99%, are loving that ignorance. And for some reason, it just is what it is. And the need for the growth that is seen, that's a cycle that is supposed to repeat per generation, per every other generation, because that's just what this place is. And to then now touch on your question of where does someone go who is lost like that, I think it begins with first understanding that. I think it begins first with understanding that, because I remember when I was publishing my first books and I was doing a lot of speaking on podcasts and radios, and I was out there doing things, and I was talking to different people and individuals and hearing their life stories, and I began to get furious for why it's so hard, so difficult for individuals to wake up to what they are. and to wake up to what this is. The fury I felt, like that initial fury of how come I can be so hated by life enough to see what this is, to care to do something about it, but nobody else, despite them getting the same hate as me, they're sinking into a lull and a comfort. So knowing what that feels like, I think is necessary in order to be able to now register with where you are, with who you are, and with where you need to move practically. So for those that are in a point of not knowing where to go, those who are at a point of feeling lost of where they are, I think first of all, there has to be a check on who you are, where are you, and what is your particular journey. Everybody's journey isn't the same. Your individual, unique journey. What are you receiving right now? How do you receive? How do you channel through this life? How do you channel through everything that is you? And I think taking that, studying that, really refining that, that's going to be able to open up a path of spirituality that's going to get you to the destination of every real, genuine mind who has developed real self-culture. But that first beginning of initially challenging you within for the purpose of realizing that this system that exists, it's an encoded system that we're in. We are in this machine of a body with an essence within it, suffering this invisible system that has been encoded into it. The same way a car is encoded to drive, the same way a refrigerator is encoded to start, the same way ice is encoded to turn into ice, the same way water is encoded to flow. And when there's a rock at the center of that water, the water doesn't stop. The water just keeps going up and over that rock or making a way around it. We're encoded in this system. And as frustrating as it is, we have to go through that realization first of what this is. And then from realizing what this is, realizing who we are. And then realizing who we are and what we are, taking that and then rationalizing that out to the being that is within. Because only then will we be able to properly define the being that is us, to then be beneficial for someone who doesn't know the being that is in them. So someone who is lost like that, that's where I would say to start. First, start with realizing where you are, and then who you are and how you process everything that you are internally.
Right. That's why I said earlier, I realized that all the answers are here on the inside.
Yeah, for sure.
The answers are on the inside. If you go out into this world, it's like sinners. You might come home with something you can't get rid of. Okay, this is serious out here. And
for sure.
The matrix that you speak about, and earlier when you said you went to the gym and you kind of like the pain, right?
Yeah.
And pain is growth, right? Pain is necessary. However, when we look at what our people been through, historically, right, through slavery and so many other wars and agendas, does it take such cruelty and punishment? Does it require one or a group of people to go through such extreme lengths of cruelty and punishment in order to reach the promised land? Is that almost mandatory? Just asking the question.
And I'm gonna respond to you as would Malcolm X. and he actually said this: you can go through every society, and there is not one society who has been enslaved that has ever told their slave master, let's integrate. Told their slave master, let's integrate. Each and every single one of these civilizations, these are whites on whites. These are Germans on Romans. These are the English on Romans. These are Romans against the world. Each and every one of these civilizations that were dominated by the Romans, I'm just using them as an example. Each and every one of these civilizations, they never said, let's integrate with Rome. Each and every single one of these civilizations, the moment they realized they were being bamboozled, every one of these civilizations, they said, you know what? Man up. We got an army. We're going to put our God on our shield, and we are going to show whose God is the real God. And sure enough, 508 AD, 490 AD to 537 AD, each and every single one of those European countries revolted against Rome and took over, as an example. So does it take that level of pain? I would say that pain is necessary, but at the same time, I think it depends on what you do with that pain. Because as a writer, I love to write in a state of emotional dreariness. Emotion is necessary for art. Any kind of art, you need to be able to sense a loss of yourself in order for that art to shine in the beauty that it's supposed to be. And I don't think that's just held to art. I think that that's held to everything. And I think that if a society and a culture and a community of a culture and society has been so beat down and felt pain and has yet to do anything about that collectively, I think that that pain has become a source of something else than what it needs to be. Or that pain has been somehow structurally conceived to be defined in a way to where it can be a coping mechanism. We're going to cope through this pain now, and we're going to have this as our story, our continuing epic. But at the same time, the revelation of the necessary pain and alleviation from pain never taking place, one has to question what pain actually is to be defined as to such a community. That's my gripe. That's my problem with where things are in the community, in the Black community, and how things are moving in that perspective. Because you can go every single civilization from the beginning of time, the moment when they realized their women were being raped, they realized their children were being killed, they realized their men were suffering through both of them too, they didn't just start marching. They put their God on their shield and they moved forward, and they created a society of their own that replicated the one from before it, to show that back then it was about God. So my God is greater than your God because my God killed your God, and now my God is the king of the world, making me king of the world, making my society and civilization king of the world, until they got knocked off by another that said, you're not going to do this to me. My God is greater than you. And it's just a continual thing.
Right.
But
right.
that definition of pain is what I'm saying. Depending on how that society has now perceived that pain to be looked at, that's the real problem. Pain is the seed to growth of everything. Tears, many tears through my poetry are shed because of the pain I felt for the purpose of growth. But if we're not defining pain as it's supposed to be an act to make one move, but we're still staying still, then it just comes down to how is that pain being defined and who's accepting that.
Yeah, you spoke about coping, and this world has essentially used us as a a conduit to essentially building up this $1 billion conglomerate that we're witnessing collapse right in front of our face. But
sure.
the forefathers, the elders, our people were built this country the way it's at today. And I ask these questions because, again, this is, internal conflict I have within myself.
Yeah.
But I always say, what is the point of battling, right? Fighting the enemy, if you will, just to end up becoming what we were going against, right? If we have to now become these individuals who practice no integrity, no respect, no morals for life, those who, the nature, everything, the whole entirety of how this world works. If you're not understanding, and you're constantly, hell bent on saying, you know what, my turn. You just talked about the cycle. One's belief was like, yo, my God versus your God.
Yeah.
And whoever lose, that's the one who dictates, how things ran. But like I said, I don't want us constantly fighting the colonizer and this wicked system just to become it. So here we are in 2026. We have a book, Becoming, right? Wrestling with Life. How do we use this, as a valuable asset to not become the enemy, to not become the wicked? Because grace Man, that's a powerful word, you know? And it's tough to say that when since the beginning it's always been eye for eye, tooth for a tooth. So how does one battle with that? I think that's kind of with Martin and Malcolm. At least that's how they're projected, right? The machine that keeps us divided. It makes you feel like you have to choose, Republican, Democrat, Indians,
Yeah.
cowboy. It's always been a choice, even as a kid, that's been instilled in us. I mean, what are your thoughts about that?
The one thing I would say is that it comes down to how are you leadership. Like that's the one word I think that all this comes down to is leadership. And whether that be in keeping in a secular sense, in an organizational sense for the definition of leadership, in a political or religious community sense of definition of leadership, you become not your enemy through the idea of leadership, and then through another philosophical idea that is out there, which is called servant leadership. And the root or the route of and to servant leadership is being able to embody a spirit of self-sacrifice for those of whom you govern. So that's how I would say you become not like the ones you've conquered, is by being able to embody the spirit of those with whom you govern. And that takes a self-sacrificing spirit. And that takes an individual going through that path of becoming. And that cycle keeps repeating because even though we've had valuable historical throughout different civilizations and empires leaders, those individuals did embody the type of approach to becoming as one as possible as they could from that high position with those that were below them, to be able to resonate with them. That is rare. That's rare. That's not always going to happen because the oppressed are always going to be focused on getting over their oppressor. The oppressed are always going to have the seed of hate in them, and that seed is going to pass down just as the seed of racism passes down to someone else. That seed is going to linger and it's going to fester, and it's going to be something that causes the idea of leadership to not become relevant. So in an ideal world, I would say, in an ideal world, for a fit leader to take their revolution to the point of now being the conquering revolution, it would take them and the ones that help them get there to become leaders of servants, servant leaders, and to be able to have the type of inward journey that they've had, and to recognize it as far as they can in the kind of situation that they're in, to be able to transcend where they are from a flesh-based point of view to seeing that they are where they are not because of something that is of them, but there is a light shining on them that has placed them in that position. There is a light shining on them. They are in that position for a certain reason, and that certain reason is for if it was me in that position, that certain reason would be I'm there to be able to embody the people of whom I govern. And so I think that's how we stop that cycle. And it doesn't, from the top to us in our homes, mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters, being able to embody this type of relationship with yourself and with the people around you, to where you realize that even your energy, invisible energy, governs those that are around you. A look you may give, something you may say, like even your stance from home, on the street, in a place of work, or however high or low you are in society, being capable of recognizing where you are serving and how you are leading. I think that's how that cycle gets stopped. But that's ideal. That's me. Like that's me. Like that's how I would love things to be.
Right. Seeing that, taking history into consideration and everything that's been done to Black people in this country, Malcolm said it, we never really had time to heal. We never had one moment of just reflection, because it's constantly running. You're feeling like you're under the gun. Even today, people are still trying to put on this outfit that clearly doesn't fit. You know what I mean? It doesn't make you who you are, and it's been like this for a long time. And this is why, at heart, I hate no one. Only thing that I hate is the system that created the circumstance that we're under. On a macro level, I understand it's going to take a collaborative effort, not just the days of a leader, because now it seems like that's the cop out. That's the lazy way. You know what? We don't have to do it. So let you be the guy for all of us. That's at this point, seeing what the system has done to our freedom fighters, our leaders, how many of them have been assassinated, right? Ridiculed. And then when the head is cut off the snake, they're left to have to fend for themselves, right? We understand that these witch hunts, essentially is to teach, right? To put people in place to not fight the system. But through it all, we still smile. Through it all, the light still shine, right? We still get up every day and try to make the best of our circumstance, because if it was like back in the day, like you spoke about when he was put mine on the shield, if we went, bloodshed, war for war, I mean, what is going to come with that? We already know, it's just at this point, like you said, protesting hasn't got the results. In the end, we have high ranking, officials corrupt, corruption is at an all-time high. We understand the agenda, but moments like this, having someone like yourself on the platform with something to actually, offer, right? Everyone's selling you something, pitching you something. What makes, what you bring to the table much different from what's being advertised on said, algorithm or timeline today? What makes a person say, you know what, I like this guy, Linwood, let me go get his book?
Honestly, I can only tell you what I've been told. What I've been told, the highest compliment that I've ever received from anyone who has either heard me speak or who has read any of my books, the highest compliment is that it sounds like you're having a conversation with me. So you're not talking at me, you're not talking to me, you're talking with me. I think that, and I try to make it a point to do that, because, again, I'm putting myself in the position of someone else. And from a business aspect, I know what I've been through. It's not easy for people to trust you. It's not the gain of trust in marketing is very brutal. So being able to have a relationship without having a relationship, being relatable and making sure that I want you to know I want to have a conversation with you because I am you, even though I'm not going through the same thing you're going through, even though to the degree I've gone through what you've gone through. And if you talk to me enough, or if you hear what I have to say, you will learn, or you will see, you'll be able to recognize I've gone through what you've gone through, and I can relate to you, allowing you to relate with me. So I think that that's one of the keys that does set me apart, that I take joy in, is the idea of conversation. There is so much forced on us. And I'm being a young person, being of youth, a young man. There is so much forced on being young, on being us in this age, whether you're from the 80s or 90s or 2000s, like being young at this time and having our impressionable nature being taken advantage of. I see so much of that, and it's to me distasteful, and I like to be as authentic as I can, and I find that authenticity through conversation works for me, because I then get to be able to say something that is ultimately relatable, because it is what I am. It is what I am. It is what I have been through. And I am only saying so because of the pain I feel within, the journey I'm still on for that healing, and the journey I know the hearer will be able to heal from too and relate to. So I think that's, if anybody really hears me and is like, well, goddamn, Where's he coming from? I think that it's from I'm hoping it's from the perspective of I'm having a conversation with you for the purpose of you, when we're done talking, being able to have a conversation with yourself.
Right. Being open to receiving said
Yes.
message, not to just respond and be divisive for the sake of a damn debate.
Yes.
Because while we are debating, there are people out here being slaughtered, and like I said, I appreciate you for even wanting to come on the platform to bless the people. It was an honor to have you on again. I would love to have you back, so we can build on a lot of these real world issues. And again, we talked about people's coping mechanism, resorting to social media, right, as a form of therapy. That's something I'm seeing a lot
Yeah.
lately. People put their whole business on the internet, as if that's going to do an ounce of maintenance. A lot of stuff is like a child going through a temper tantrum. You don't realize the power that one possesses. People fail to realize that there's a God in us. The Creator instilled that same power. It's inside of you to go out here and manifest the world that you dream of. And I'm gonna be real with you. I said it about 3 months ago that I was going to create the world that I wanted to be a part of. Like-minded individuals who had the same goals, in mind, and that's restoring the order amongst our people. And like I said, it's very specific because, as you can see, it's looking as if we're the ones that's going to be displaced out here trying to uh, find our way back, from this experience that we thought, was rooted in capitalism,
Yep.
commercialism, the
Yep.
money, the fantasy. We were sold the fantasy just like our elders
Yep.
were. And here we are almost in 2030. They're talking about 500 billion, projected to be a part of the content creator space. 500 billion. And we're not at the round table to even have the conversation. We know we'll be used, or will we? We don't know now. The AI is the flavor of the month, but it looks, from my perspective, as if America has used us up. And, now we're sitting here trying to find our way back, putting the pieces together. So this is why it's important for someone like yourself and many others who are out here leading by example, on the front line, doing what's right for your people. So before we go, I just want you to deliver a message to your people, to our people, as if this was, a broadcast, if you will. This was like Warriors, the movie, and you were sending out a message to those who are listening, who are willing to receive that message. What would you say?
Love. That one message is love, and not romantic, not sensual. Love is not an emotion. Love is a state of mind. So the one message I would say is, for the purpose and for the sake of love, and for being able to take care of the consciences of those that are around you, discover the definition of love for you, your own unique self individually, and take that journey and let that unfold into the you that is to be envisioned for you to achieve that.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. Brother Linwood Jackson Jr. I will have his information available in the description so you guys can, do your due diligence, do your homework. As the man said, he's only willing to assist if you're open. This isn't a matter of forcing anyone's ideology or beliefs. It's like we said earlier, we're at the crossroad where this is a new chapter, a new era that has been ushered upon us. And if you notice, America has been celebrating 250 years of, what they say is freedom. If you're religious, some would say this is the end of the devil and its rule over the world. Some believe that it's coming up to where as though the creator is about to return. There are people who believe that. And this is why we're seeing so much controversy, being thrown on our ways, because the devil knows his time is coming to an end and he's not going out alone. right? It feels like now people who display no integrity, right, have no shame, right, no honor, they're the ones being paraded around, right?
That's
While
to
all of the good
celebrate.
people who have, right, who have integrity, who stand for principles, the betterment of our people. It seems like we're going through the most right now.
Going through it.
Yep, and not trying to break,
Yeah.
right? Becoming unbreakable, being pushed to a point where you say, regardless of what, that's when you know your faith is ironclad. That's when you know you can't be touched. If it's money, if it's, relationships, these things come and go. They change all the time. But how we approach life and what we stand for has to always remain, intact. So that's what I'll add to your message.
100% true. Going through it. And I think that it's prime time to take that inward journey, because everything else around us we can see it's not real. And we even though we're still feeding into it, this is prime time to be able to go into ourselves and to find out what is real, because not much is. So whatever's leading up to where society is going to take us, I just watched the interview with Elon Musk, who just said by 2036, money's not going to be necessary. So it just makes you wonder, money for who? And then they're saying by 2030, life's going to be different with this whole change of a visual or digital ID type of lifestyle, some sort of cashless society. So I mean, I don't put nothing on these numbers. I don't put nothing in anything that's gonna. But these things that people are saying, they're being said for a certain reason. And I think my overall point is everything is fake that we can see is fake, but we have to be able to now, this is prime time that we can see what's really being unveiled. Curtains are falling. We got to be able to open up some curtains inside of us to see what character we have, to really know who we are individually and uniquely. I think this is the real prime time for it. This is the time for the manner of spiritual enlightenment that is personal and that is individual, because everything around us is exposing itself to be contrary to what the human being needs. So I agree with you 100%.
Listen, man, like I said, it was an honor and a pleasure to have you on the platform. I hope this interview, reaches, the right people that's in need right now, that is in need of guidance, because like you said, we are not, the age of our elders, in the sense of being
Yes.
old, but because so much damage has been done, the leadership is mandatory at this point.
Yes.
We can sit here and argue all day about what needs to be done, this, that, and the third, but in the end, action is required. Work is required. And it's not on the backs of, Jay-Z or Floyd, the usual suspects that they parade as if, they aren't the exception to the rule. They want you to believe that you too can reach that height. But when you think about it collectively, it's on us to restore the order in our communities, to protect our children, protect our elders, protect our neighborhoods. We have to want to take part in that. We have to value it like we value everything else. When it's time to do the right thing, it's all of these excuses, right? But when it's time to start sinning, everybody's dressed early, 15 minutes, they got their hair cut. And that's where it's like, you know what? I don't fault the children, This is their first time. It's the adults who know better that should not be acting like a child, but should be taking part in being the leader to lead them, on the right path, and not lead them down the path of destruction. You talk about coping and how I feel like at times we're so addicted to how the world views us that we practice so many different forms of self-sabotage and we don't even realize
Very true.
it, So I hope that this conversation, sparks that little seed in your mind of curiosity to want to know the truth, to find it, because there's so many so-called experts and gurus out here. And, the biggest teacher of life is the experience that you earn. going through the ups and downs. That's really the reward to life, because you only get one, you know?
I do. That also, a lot of people reach out for me for counseling on their spiritual journey and for their spiritual development. And what I know, and there's a trend that touches exactly like what you just said. They are relying on the guru. Like, they want the guru to show them how to behave. They think that when they come to me, I'm going to be a guru that's going to give them the answers. And I've even been told, give me the answers. But the real route to the answer is, and the tactic for such a profession is being able to rewrite someone's experience to their own conscience, to where they're able to see the answer themselves. And so I think that that's also part of the problem, is seeing what we call culture and seeing what we define as society as being the answer to trend to, as being the answer to give us the solution. But, like you say, it always just keeps coming back to what is within, being able to understand what is within, and being able to have a sense of direction for what is within. And that, I'll tie that back to my book, Becoming. I had somebody read it, and they told me that after the first poem, they cried because these poems are supposed to be conversations that, even though like I'm writing them and I'm having them with myself, but these are conversations that every human being is going to have with themselves at some point. And it's those kind of conversations that are supposed to take us forward into being able to apply who we are in a way that is reasonable and in a way that just transcends love as an emotion and then leads to a state of mind for a state of being. So I agree again with what you're saying on that.
It seems like we in agreement on a lot of things, Brother Linwood. It seems like we come on, we picking up on the same thing. We're starting to see the signs. It's like being on the highway. You see the signs, showing you what's about to happen. And instead of sitting here in this mental state of, uncertainty, depression, it's time to, make the change, get prepared, get ready for what's coming, because it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And you don't want to wait until it's too late. We're as good as our community. A lot of this stuff is rooted in individualism, which ironically keeps people rich, ironically. But if you think about how it all started, us as a community, a tribe, of people, it's time to come back home, y'all. Put down your devices, break free of, all of these things that don't make you who you are anyway. So I hope that after today, with this book, Becoming, Wrestling with Life, you walk away with something that, can last a lifetime. Because right now, while we see people selling us, who's going to be here to lead this next generation down the right path? And I hope that, Linwood, together, we can make a difference. That's what I'm hoping for moving forward after today.
That is my same hope. That's been my MO, my mission since the beginning, because someone has to say something. Like, it's just getting wild. Someone has to say something that's going to help. Something going on out here with folks and the way they're perceiving themselves and the way that they're perceiving one another. Like, something has to be said. And I'm hoping that my work, my book, can individually for someone be that something.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is the wonderful Linwood Jackson Jr. promoting his latest book, Becoming, Wrestling with Life. Again, I hope you enjoyed this deep intellectual conversation. Like I said, man, I appreciate you, being on the platform, and I'm open to bringing you on again to discuss some of these real world events that, it isn't random, it isn't coincidence. And, maybe we can break it down, decode some of these things, because the work is needed. And, where are the people going to turn to? You need those who are made of substance, something that's real, not superficial. And I think that's what made this conversation today very powerful, very potent. And, again, thank you. And, appreciate you for being on the platform, man.
Thank you.
All right, y'all. With that being said, we out. Appreciate y'all. Each and every one of y'all tuned into the episode. Like I said, this is the first episode of Conversations with Rip, season 4. We're going beyond the surface, y'all. It's not about just entertainment. It's about value. You know, who are those out here who really are helping our people, who don't get the just due, who don't get the pat on the back, and yet they get up and they attack this world every day with the same attitude, the same faith intact. And that's what we want brought to the forefront. You know what I mean? Not the age of provocateurs, not the clowns, but those who really have something to offer, because the old world does not resonate with this new generation, you know, so they need something that's going to prepare them for what's to come. And I really believe the work that you're doing, as well as myself, being able to utilize this platform to broadcast to our people that are in need right now because devices aren't working, you know, all of the things that they've used, you know, up until this point, it has no purpose. So hopefully this book, Becoming, is the introduction to that new chapter, you know, that's coming. So that being said, y'all, we up out of here. Peace.